Hello friends of Crawford, it's me Michael Waldron again, and thank you so much for joining me on this second part of our guided visit to the exhibition Lucid Abnormalities. In this session we're going to have a look at works by Edith Somerville and William Crozier, so please join me as we look at some of the collection highlights from the Crawford Art Gallery. So this painting next to me requires very little introduction. It is a great favourite of visitors, and it's almost a terrible thing if we ever take it off display. It of course is The Goose Girl by Edith Somerville, which dates to 1888. And many of you will know the painting quite well, but I suppose we might explore it a little bit and think about its different elements. First of all, I'd like to think about its style. So this is sort of French peasant realism, which was popular during the second half of the 19th century, and particularly was filtering into Irish and British art at that time. But of course, Edith Somerville was a very, very enterprising woman. Born in Corfu, she grew up in Castletownshend in West Cork, and this particular style, I think, emerges from her own training in Paris at the Académie Colarossi, or Colarosi's studio. And of course we have some sketches in the collection as well, which speak to that particular time of her life. But this particular painting is probably her best known and her most accomplished. And so let's have a look. What is it? So we have the girl herself of the title. She is barefoot, she is kneeling or crouching in the corner of this probably West Cork cottage. Her face is so extraordinary. The lips are pouting, and the nostrils are flared, and the eyes are welling up. So she is very, very upset. And I think we know why. Here she clutches the goose. Probably her pet. Perhaps she's even given it a name. And then all of the cooking utensils and ingredients to this side of the painting tell us what's happening. The goose is on the menu, I'm afraid. And here the Goose Girl is expressing all of that, I suppose, feeling of sadness, of injustice, particularly that a child feels that is maybe overwhelming. What's also really exciting about this painting is that very, very recently we purchased a new acquisition by Edith Somerville, which is a small sketch about this size that is a head study for this figure. We know her name was Mary Ann, and perhaps the pub in Castletownshend is named after Mary Ann, but it shows this face with a different expression, and the eyes are looking out at us. So we're very excited to welcome it to the collection, and in the future we hope to display them together so that we can learn more about how the artist approached this subject. So this work is really, really gorgeous, and we don't get to show it very often. It's a portrait study from about 1930 by May Guinness. Now, you've heard of Nora McGuinness, but May Guinness was of the same time and a real pioneer. So she was that generation that included Mary Swansea and Mamie Jellett and Evie Home. And she learned, I suppose, the flavours and disciplines of modernism while travelling in Europe, particularly France. And this particular work, I think, tells you all about that wonderful modern woman, the new woman. And so she has a quite interesting expression, like the Goose Girl, but in this case we have one red eye and one blue eye. So it's almost as if one half of her face is flashing in anger, But of course, the artist has learned this kind of use of colour from examples that she was seeing in France in the early 20th century, particularly around 1905, 1906, and Matisse's play with colour and the non-naturalistic colours. So in this case, she has a relationship with other later artists like Sylvia Cook-Collis in this sort of Fauvist treatment. But there's something of Fauvism and Cubism in this painting. A woman in a brown bonnet and perhaps a heavy coat, a white blouse. And so this is the new woman who has the vote in 1930 and perhaps making her own way in life. So I've got two beautifully coloured paintings behind me by two very recognisable artists. I'll begin with the one on my right, which is called The River Boundary, Loch Eyne, by William Crozier. It dates to 1988, and what the artist has done is he's kind of almost immersed us in Loch Eyne, that wonderful marine lake in West Cork, incidentally Europe's first marine nature reserve since the 1980s. And so what we have is the perspective of perhaps coming out through some trees and bushes onto the waters of the lake, or perhaps it's the rapids, that narrow channel that connects to the Atlantic Ocean. And what I really love about this is that the artist was trying to achieve a new type of landscape painting and a new direction. And so with this, I think we have a very high horizon line, so you can just about make out kind of the level of the water up here. So we're really staring down into the bioluminescent waters of Loch Eyne and this part of West Cork. So it seems to glow and sing and be rich of life. And I think that's what makes this a really dynamic but also very pleasing painting for us to experience. I think we can get lost in this landscape, and there is something that immerses us. And then, if we move to the other side of me, we have a work by Hughie O'Donoghue, which is called Medusa, and it's from about 2005, 2006. And it's part of a series that the artist was making at the time, and it focuses on, I suppose, a response to Theodore Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa, a very famous early 19th century painting that documented a specific infamous event, the wreck of the French naval frigate Medusa off Western Africa and Mauritania. And the artist has sort of dismantled that idea, and he's thinking about, in this painting, which is beautifully painted, he is thinking about the everyday lives that are caught up in world events. And so what we have is this wonderful canvas of colour, of these kind of rich ochres, and then two forms start to emerge, almost ghostly. One is the very dark form of a shipwreck, which isn't the Medusa at all, but actually the MV Plassey, which is wrecked on the Aran Islands. So if any of you have seen the opening credits to Father Ted, that's the wreck. But also, just emerging from the canvas as well is this face, which is very much a Géricault or early 19th century French academic face peering out at us. And so it is that individual who is caught up in this disaster. So the two paintings tell us something very, very different about water, the sea, and our experience of the world. So again, a painting that requires no introduction whatsoever, but I think it's always a sin if we go past it. And of course, this is The Red Rose, which dates to 1923 by Sir John Lavery. Of course, it would be familiar to so many of you, and it is really kind of one of the key works in the collection here. We bought it in 1925, so the year after we bought Men of the South and our Harry Clarke watercolours. And it was bought through our Gibson bequest, which was this wonderful gift in 1919, which helped us to secure an acquisitions fund to grow the collection over the 20th century. And so I suppose we should never forget that wonderful gift of Joseph Stafford Gibson 100 years ago. But let's introduce ourselves, or reintroduce ourselves, to the subject of the painting. Of course, this is Hazel Lavery, born Hazel Martin. And what we have here is this really languorous pose, but also one that is deep in thought. So I think what really brings people back and back to this painting is not only its beautiful colour and the elegance, but also that faraway look in Hazel's eyes, as she does not engage with us, the viewer, nor does she engage with the artist, her husband. After all, he had painted maybe nearly 400 portraits of her during their time together, so you could be forgiven for dozing off a little bit. But here she just rubs this red rose against her very pale skin, and she, of course, is that wonderful face of the age, a very sought-after model herself, a socialite and an artist. And I think what's wonderful about her is that she had a sense of humour. And so when soon after her husband had received a knighthood as a war artist, becoming Sir John Lavery, she became Lady Lavery. And she would introduce herself at parties, and people would respond by saying, "Down the hall and to the left," thinking that she'd said ladies' lavatory. So she took this title with a pinch of salt, saw the maybe the nonsense in it, but also the honour. And here we have that really gorgeous image of her from 1923. And this was about 15 years or so into their marriage, still a muse for her husband, and perhaps she's thinking on all manner of things. We don't know, and I think that's the attraction. So this painting is called Entering, and we don't often get to show it, and that's another great pleasure of being able to select works from the collection and bring them back into public view. It dates to 1993, and it's by the artist Katherine Boucher Beug. And what I really love about this is its mystery. It allows us to maybe think on the forms and the colour and the composition, maybe to allow our mind wander. The artist herself says that it was a product of a lot of drawing at the time in her drawing books, and in particular she was thinking about trauma, therapy, feminism, these kind of quite large subjects, and so that they inform this work. Now, that doesn't allow us maybe to fully interpret it, but at least gives us a backdrop to what we're looking at, with this wonderful sort of jagged, almost violent red form that takes up and pulls our eye over to the right-hand side. And this wonderful kind of wash of white that is on top of this green ground. But the other forms are pulled through as if drawing onto the canvas or scraped in. And so it is a real expression that allows us to maybe take time with it. The artist first exhibited this in our sculpture galleries in 1994, and it has been in the collection ever since. And so it's a great joy to be able to bring it back out and to celebrate a really, really remarkable work. So we're coming full circle here, and the last painting in this little tour that began with the Goose Girl now continues with Time Flies, and doesn't it just? This painting by William Gerard Barry is another great favourite in the collection. It dates to 1887, so just 1 year before Edith Somerville's The Goose Girl. And again, it brings us into sort of French peasant realism. The landscape that we see could be William Gerard Barry's native Carrigtwohill or near Fota, but of course it is the north of France, where the artist journeyed in the 1880s. His life is an extraordinary one, which I won't go into now, because I really want to focus on this really, I suppose, thoughtful and meditative scene, which is about the passing of time. I suppose this year we have really become conscious of that, and I think it's okay to think about it, not to dismiss it, but to be aware of it and to be at ease with it. And so here we have a wonderful autumnal scene. You can see the kind of the change of colour on the ground. The trees are just beginning to turn, perhaps, particularly here and in the background. And we have perhaps an evening time setting, because we have the long shadows of the trees and the long shadow of the walking stick. We also have this wonderful sort of calm river. It's not a young river that is racing down a mountain. It is not the juvenile stage of a river, but maybe the more mature course, which tells us again something of time as it still flows on. And then it brings us to the figures themselves. The three children gathered at the base of a tree are preoccupied by something. Perhaps it's a game, perhaps they're inventing some story, or perhaps something has caught their attention in the grass. But they are in their own world, perhaps not even aware of the passage of time, or at least time has a different meaning for them. And then you have the older woman here watching on as she contemplates them. And perhaps she is thinking, time flies. It's not so very long ago that she was one of them. And so it is all of this meditating on the passage of time that the artist captures so beautifully. And I think that's why it has become such a favourite with visitors today. Thank you so much for joining me on this second guided visit to Lucid Abnormalities. I hope you've enjoyed it and that it has transported you a little bit in the time we've been together. I'm looking forward to the time when we can all be in the gallery again. But until then, enjoy this and savour it, and we'll see each other again soon.